In 2024, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services launched the Cell and Gene Therapy Access Model, one of several payment and delivery models that it planned to implement with a goal of lowering drug costs and promoting access to innovative therapies for Medicare and Medicaid enrollees. The first iteration of the model will apply to gene therapies authorized for treating sickle cell disease. I'm Stephen Morrissey, managing editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, and I'm talking with Joseph Ross, a professor in the Department of Internal Medicine at the Yale School of Medicine and in the Department of Health Policy and Management at the Yale School of Public Health. Dr. Ross has written a perspective article about the model, including unanswered questions about the structure and terms of the model's payment agreements. Dr. Ross, broadly, what is the goal of the Cell and Gene Therapy Access Model? Why did regulators consider it necessary to try to find creative ways to pay for cell and gene therapies?
This is a very exciting new innovation in payment and delivery from CMS. For many years, CMS has focused on payment and delivery models, mostly focused on physician and hospital-based services, looking to improve quality and lower costs. This is a model that was developed in response to President Biden's executive order for CMMI to develop new models that will lower drug costs for Medicare and Medicaid beneficiaries and promote access to innovative therapies. So 3 different models were proposed by HHS, and the cell and gene therapy model is really the first out of the gate. These are really innovative, cutting edge, but expensive new therapies that are being developed to treat often rare or more rare diseases. And so these therapies focused on sickle cell disease are fairly transformative. The idea being that rather than treating the symptoms that patients experience over their lifetimes, instead, they're trying to essentially solve the disease. These gene therapies are administered a very intensive treatment period, but the hope is that it completely resolves the disease by addressing the underlying genetic abnormality that led to it.
You say that in many ways, sickle cell disease therapies were an ideal selection for the first iteration of the model. Why is that the case?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, this is a highly burdensome disease affecting a population of patients who've often been neglected within our healthcare system. Black patients and other minority patients, people for whom healthcare access has already been structurally disadvantaged. And here now is a new therapy coming to market, and it's extraordinarily expensive. Many patients with sickle cell disease are disabled, and so they receive their insurance coverage through state Medicaid programs. And so the idea of, well, how are we going to organize and ensure that the patients who are most likely to benefit from these therapies have access to it and can afford it? Well, so by CMMI launching this first model to focus on this specific population is in many ways ideal. Here are people that would otherwise not be able to afford care. And here are state Medicaid programs that are already challenged in terms of affording budgets that are growing and affording care for their beneficiaries. So thinking about innovative new approaches to ensure that these patients have access is ideal for that reason.
And what's the current status of the model? Where is CMS in the implementation process?
So the models themselves, the key terms that are actually negotiated between CMS and the 2 pharmaceutical manufacturers that make FDA-approved gene therapies for this disease, were negotiated and agreed upon in early December of 2024. This included prices, payment agreement structures, the eligibility for treatment, the outcome measures by which the cell and gene therapy model will be evaluated. All of this will form the basis of the contracts between the manufacturers and the states who then volunteer to participate in the model. So the terms have been disclosed to the states, and now state Medicaid agencies have to apply, and I believe the application period is open through February 2025 to begin participating anytime in the 2025, I think through January 2026 period.
As you say, key terms have been negotiated between manufacturers and states that are participating in the model. What's known about the terms that were negotiated?
This is part of the reason I wrote this perspective, because the terms, while they've been disclosed to states, have not been made publicly available. And part of the point that I wanted to make is that this is a very unique and innovative program, and there should have been, in my opinion, more opportunity for public participation into how the agreements were formed and what these key terms and how they were negotiated. And I make that point in part because while this model for sickle cell disease therapies is ideal for some reasons that I can get into, future models may not be as clear. So, for instance, we know that this disease has a terrible prognosis. And when these therapies are administered, they really are transformative. Patients within a year seem to go from having multiple vaso-occlusive crises, which occur as a result of the disease, to having almost none. So you can see the benefit of the therapy almost immediately. Moreover, the key outcomes that would be evaluated in a model like this or for a disease like this can all be ascertained from claims data. So we know if patients are coming back to the physician offices or coming back to the hospital to be treated for sickle cell disease, whether they are getting hospitalizations for those vaso-occlusive crises. So that, again, makes it very easy. But not all diseases are going to be as clear. And I raise some concerns about, well, what would have been done if we had, instead of focusing on vaso-occlusive crisis, instead focused on patient-reported outcome measures that needed to be collected directly from patients. Some of these therapies carry some severe adverse profiles and adverse reactions and other safety concerns. Well, should safety have been part of the evaluation for the measure? And then I think most critically, there has been no opportunity for the public to comment on how these outcomes-based agreements were going to be set or how the drug prices were going to be established. Are these going to be rebates that are provided back to CMS and over what time period? The cost of these drugs is in the multiple millions of dollars. So is the expectation that CMS pays up front and then somehow gets a reimbursement if the patient doesn't experience the benefit of treatment? Or is the idea that the patient undergoes the treatment and then they will only pay for the drug if after a year they've had a successful outcome? There are lots of different ways that these outcomes agreements could have been structured. And right now, nobody knows exactly how it was done except for the manufacturers, CMS, and the states.
So clearly these negotiated terms could influence the success of this model and possibly of future access models.
That's exactly right. In many ways, the way federal governments and agencies like this work is that they establish precedent. And so sometimes the first deal is the way all the other future deals are structured. And so my worry is here in this kind of ideal case, we have a structure that nobody really understands or has any access to any of the key information about, but yet it's going to now be the terms by which all other manufacturers will use in future cell and gene therapy models, if there are ones in the future.
Finally, what are your expectations for the future of the cell and gene therapy access model? Will the change in administration affect the implementation of the model or of other planned models?
Unfortunately, I think your guess is as good as mine. The Trump administration released an executive order that essentially undid Biden administration's executive order to develop and test these models. So the question is, here's a model that has already been developed and implemented, right? States are now negotiating. It seems that this model will continue to move forward, but it's unclear whether future models or future therapies within this model could be pursued. So it's an outstanding question that I don't think there's any clarity on as yet, and we'll have to follow to see what the administration does moving forward.
Thank you, Dr. Ross.